and I changed again into another set of clothes. So I'm already on to the second set of clothes that they've given me, okay? I would walk then across the entry gate and I would walk to another building. So I kind of walked across this parking lot, walked to another building, and I'm still hundreds of yards away from the main farm, much less even the pigs. And I would shower at that second gate. And then I would put on the third set of farm clothes. And then I would walk to the living area of the farm. In China, you'll oftentimes live on the farm in a dorm-like setup. But I couldn't go see the pigs yet. I had to live in the living area for 2 nights in a full day and a half. So I'd arrive late at night on the first night, and I'd go to bed, and the next day, well, I still couldn't go to see the pigs all day. And then I had to wait again another night. And then on day 2, finally, I would eventually get to go to see the pigs. And to go see the pigs, we had to walk to a fogging area. So we'd leave the living area, walk to a fogging area where we were physically disinfected. We were fogged with who knows what sort of chemical disinfectants. And then we could walk to the production line. That's what they call the farm in China. That's where the pigs actually live. And then it would be like entering a farm in the US at that point. You know, I would get into the production line. There'd be a bench. I would change my shoes at that bench, and then I would shower into the farm and put on farm clothes number 4. So think about that level of investment and the risk management. It's truly the best people biosecurity in the world. Now, this is how they brought feed into the farm, and very common historically in China and Southeast Asia that they use bagged feed. And the picture in the upper left is a reefer trailer that's loaded with bags of feed. You can kind of see it in the top left there. And they would drive that reefer trailer right through that first gate that I showed you. And they would drive it to the second gate. This is actually the place where I would shower. This is the second gate to the farm. And they'd back up that trailer full of bags and feed. And they'd have an internal trailer from the farm come pick up all those bags of feed. And then they'd drive up here past our little fumigation shed for me and all the workers. And they'd drive to this centralized building here that lived in the middle of the complex. And there they would rip open the bags of feed, dump them into a pit, and then they would auger them into the farm's feed truck. And they would deliver the feed to the farm that way. Okay. And I want to show you a video here of the unloading of the feed. This is a combination of feed mill workers. The feed mill was maybe 30 kilometers away. And farm employees who would come out together and they would unload the bags of feed every day. This was a 14,000 sow level farm, so they needed lots of feed. Look at where this driver of the feed truck is standing, right? All of these feed bags are going right into the middle of the farm. What took me days and showers and 4 sets of clothes to get through, these feed bags could go directly to that, okay? And so I share that with you as an example of a mismatch in investment, okay? Don't invest in perfect biosecurity in one area if you're gonna have lower levels of biosecurity in other areas. So to summarize my part, 3 principles of biosecurity: exclude what you can, use hygiene and sanitation for everything, but make sure there's redundant steps, because no, we will probably not get it right all the time. And where you can segregate risk, segregate assets, please do so. Hygiene and sanitation are mandatory, okay? And if they're critical, if you've got to get something clean, like a truck, inspect what you expect, okay? Set the expectation and inspect those items that you expect to be clean and disinfected. Remember that temperature and time are your friend. We don't have to rely solely on chemical disinfectants, okay? This can be where that redundancy comes in. I see much less compliance issues with time and temperature biosecurity approaches. And so we may use a chemical disinfectant, you know, an alcohol, a peroxide, a glutaraldehyde, whatever, and use time and temperature on top of that. So we have a belt and suspenders approach to biosecurity. Time and temperature is easy to measure and it's easy to execute. Remember the case studies. Invest consistently across your risk factors and think to yourself, you know, what's your farm's bagged feed gap? What are you doing today that you're like, oh yeah, we kind of fit that picture? You know, what's your system's maintenance truck that's connecting risk to farms that otherwise are not connected from a risk standpoint? They don't share employees. They don't share other assets, right? They aren't right next to each other to share aerosol risk. Good biosecurity is going to involve many stakeholders. Work with your suppliers and vendors, create and share expectations. A lot of them aren't going to understand ASF and the risk like you do, but they are in this game with us, right? If you go out of business, they go out of business. So they're stakeholders and they'll listen if you communicate with them. And then last but not least, good biosecurity involves training, auditing, and motivation, just like anything else we ask our farms and our employees to execute. Again, inspect what you expect. People will respect that. When you create expectations, but you don't monitor those expectations, you're telling me that you don't really care, right? Create a culture of accountability. Every time I go on farm and ask about, biosecurity gaps or failures, I hear a lot of they have done a lot of things wrong on farms. Hey, when you remove mortalities, Mr. or Mrs. Employee, do you do it per the SOP? Oh, I do. But they don't always do that, right? Don't make it a we versus they, right? Create that culture of accountability so that on your farm, people are holding each other accountable. And with that, I think that's all I've got. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be involved.
Dr. Johnson, thanks for that great information and great case study examples as well. I'm going to give Dr. Zabel the opportunity to pull up her presentation and explain how people can put all this into practice.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to join you this afternoon. We just heard a couple great speakers set me up here for what the importance of having solid biosecurity in your herds. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about resources. These resources are available to producers to help you increase the level of biosecurity on your farms as you work to keep ASF from infecting your animals. So when I talk to producers about biosecurity and developing a site-specific biosecurity plan, many times the question I get is, where do I start? And the answer is, well, that depends. We just heard from Dr. Johnson about having several biosecurity plans, a plan addressing each of the critical control points. And I'm going to kind of refer to an accumulation of those plans all put together into one. So I'm going to talk about a site-specific biosecurity plan, which is kind of, as to what he described, a series of a bunch of mini plans describing how you're addressing each of these critical control points or risks, how you're addressing the risks of inputs and outputs coming to your farm. So again, the answer is, where do I start? It depends where you are at in the process. If you're to the point where you're just now getting started, that picture may look different than if you have a few biosecurity measures in place, but you don't really have the written plan. So you've had some things you've been doing, but not addressing all the areas on the farm that need to be addressed, or have thought through maybe other approaches on how to implement those biosecurity measures. Or you might have a plan or a series of several plans rolled into one site-specific biosecurity plan, but you need to work on implementing those measures. So again, where you start depends where you currently are. So if you're just getting started, I would encourage you to, first of all, work with your herd veterinarian. We just heard from Dr. Johnson, who has had extensive experience working with producers on biosecurity on their site, and they are truly an asset to you. Many of you have a herd veterinarian that you consult regularly, or some of you may have a veterinarian who occasionally writes health papers or treats a sick animal. And in this case, it would benefit you to develop a relationship with a veterinarian who can assist you with this on-farm biosecurity. Veterinarians are an asset. They understand the inputs and outputs specific to your farm and the risks that you bring with those. So again, include that herd veterinarian. Taking biosecurity training and reviewing the resources that I'm going to talk about, as well as others that you have access to, will really help you think through what is the best approach for me in implementing these measures on my farm. So let's talk just a little bit about biosecurity training. This came about because it was decided as we were developing some of these resources for Secure Pork that it was a way to bring everybody on board, everybody on the farm, as far as the producers, the caretakers, everyone involved, to help them understand the importance of biosecurity. And so there are different options available to you. We have 4 videos available at securepork.org. The first one is a introductory biosecurity video. The second is a do not bring disease to the farm and the risks that you bring with you. And the remaining 2 talk about some high-level biosecurity practices, including one on the line of separation, as Dr. Johnson mentioned. So it kind of helps explain those different concepts to you. If you're an individual that has company trainings available, I would encourage you to utilize those, as well as those that might have opportunities through a local extension office. So any biosecurity training that you can be involved in, I would encourage you to do so, that they'll all help you understand the importance of biosecurity and how you can identify these different risks on your farm. Let's talk a little bit about creating that biosecurity plan. One option to utilize the templates available at securepork.org. There are 2 different types of templates available. One is for animals raised indoors only, and the other one is a combination for animals with outdoor access or possibly raised indoors also. So for those of you that have animals with outdoor access, you can utilize the second template and just not address those questions that are revolve around animals that are raised indoors. But we felt it was important to develop the second template because there are going to be producers, some of you out there that maybe farrow indoors, but then have, for example, hoop buildings for finishing. And so it may be a combination. And rather than completing 2 different templates, we wanted to make sure you only needed to go through one of those templates. So as you look at these templates, they kind of walk you through writing the biosecurity plan. They have questions within it, spaces to fill out to indicate how you're addressing the certain risks that are listed within those draft templates. And again, I encourage you to work with your herd veterinarian. They are such a great resource in understanding the risk and helping sometimes take a step back. Sometimes we implement measures on our farm, and having someone else looking them over and providing input really gives you that different perspective. When we talk about Secure Pork and these biosecurity plans, one of the things that we talk about is a site map. And here's 2 examples of site maps. And these maps do take time to create. And I know that can be just not an easy part of the process. But what they do provide is they give us a chance to start thinking about the inputs and outputs that move around our site. And so we ask that there's certain lines drawn on the site as far as the line of separation, access points, those kinds of things that have been. And what that does is it helps us think about how we're moving things around our site and to think if there's pathways that maybe we can alter, things that we can do to minimize cross traffic between those inputs coming on, like say feed trucks, and the foot traffic around the site of like producers or caretakers when they're moving around the site between the barns, or something like removing deads from the barns. So at securepork.org, we do have example maps available for animals, again, that are raised indoors versus those animals with outdoor access. And there is some flexibility in how you draw the lines on your site. It depends on how the site layout is. I mean, sites vary greatly in their layout. The area you're located and the weather conditions that you deal with may affect where you draw some of those lines. In addition to the inputs and the outputs that you have on your farm, which may be different between farms. So while these maps do look different, it's equally important for each site to implement the biosecurity measures on their farm to prevent ASF entry. So now once you have your written plan, it's important to start implementing those measures in the plan. Because of course, it's not having the plan written out on paper that protects the farm, but it's actually implementing those measures on a daily basis and having them become part of the habit and the routine of those individuals on the site is what actually protects the site. So I know that this can be daunting in some cases, depending where you are in the process. My family, we're cow-calf producers. We're working on implementing measures in the secure beef supply plan right now. And there's a thought process that goes on how you implement some of the measures that are there. But again, the big goal is to keep these diseases out, especially ASF. And so it's, how can we divide those up into doable bits? What can we implement in the next month or the next 3 months? Or maybe there's some measures there that take a little bit more thought and process and require some resources that might take you 6 months before you get them implemented. So again, it's important to implement and incorporate these measures into the routine biosecurity of the farm that you follow day in and day out. So let's talk just a little bit about what that might look for your farm. And again, this is going to vary depending on the farm as far as what they're already implementing, what is doable on the farm right away, or maybe your approach is that you want to address your highest risks first and put more enhanced biosecurity measures in to address those risks. So some examples might be that you decide that you want to provide site-specific clothing and coveralls or footwear is a measure that you can implement this month. It may be that you improve your rodent control, or it may be that you decide that items entering your farm are one of your highest risks. And so that's something you want to do is address the entry process for deliveries on things like equipment, supplies, semen, and so on. And then on to what are you going to do within the next 3 months? And again, is this something that requires thought? Maybe it's a little more difficult to implement, takes time, and so it requires a little extra time. Have you thought about how you could maybe make feed delivery more biosecure? We just saw a good example of where that could be improved, and are there things we need to take a step back? The route that the truck drives when it comes on the farm, or how are you bringing feed onto the site? Could you do it in a more biosecure way? What about animal transport vehicles? Whether it's a semi and trailer, or whether it's a pickup truck and a livestock trailer, is there a way you can increase the level of biosecurity around that equipment coming on the site? What about garbage disposal? One thing you have to keep in mind is garbage trucks go from site to site to site. So are we asking the garbage truck to come onto the site, or are we move our dumpster or our garbage cans or whatnot to a location where we don't have the garbage truck driving onto our site? So again, just some things to think about. It may vary with how you want to address things on site or the order of which you'd like to address things. I'm just giving a few examples here as you kind of think this through on how you can start implementing measures on your site. So what about those measures that maybe you're looking to address in 6 months to a year? Maybe these are ones that take a little bit longer to think through, maybe requires a few adjustments on the farm. Hauling manure, of course, creates a risk depending if the equipment is shared or what measures are taken as the equipment is moved between the sites. So are there any biosecurity measures that could be included here as we look to be hauling manure? What about carcass disposal? Of course, this can be another risky event depending if the carcasses are disposed of on site or they're removed from the site, and depends how they're removed from the buildings. What measures can be put into place to minimize the risk of bringing the disease onto the site when you're removing the carcasses from the site? So we've talked about some of the resources, including the template available at securepork.org. And an example of that is in the top right corner there of the screen. But there's also many other resources available at Secure Pork that you can utilize and read through as you're developing your biosecurity plan. There's instructions there on how to create site maps. There's a link to the EPA registered disinfectants approved for ASF. There's guidance on hosting international abroad. There's also links to biosecurity posters. Again, there's several different resources there. And when I talked in the beginning about reviewing some of the resources available to you, maybe take a look at those as you're developing your site plans and see if there's any information there that helps provide of use to you as you're writing in those measures that you're going to take on your site. At porkcheckoff.org, you'll find some resources. that are directed at the youth so that they can increase their level of biosecurity as producers also. And there's also some disease-specific resources available. The Center for Food Security and Public Health at Iowa State University has some biosecurity resources also. And those resources will help you think through the risks with specific inputs and outputs present on your site. And then we also have AgView listed. That is a dashboard of which producers, when you have biosecurity plans, if you sign up within AgView and create an account, that you could, it's a place where you could store your biosecurity plan. And again, the only way that anyone would see that is if you share it through your permissioned process of sharing. Dr. Scheer also mentioned that you can find some resources on the USDA website too to help with biosecurity. So there's resources out there. I'd encourage you to look through them. And again, I talk a lot about utilizing your herd veterinarian to help you with the process. One additional resource that I'd like to mention to aid in the development of the biosecurity plans is the RAB app, which stands for Rapid Access Biosecurity. This app has been developed by Dr. Gustavo Machado at North Carolina State University. Dr. Machado and his team, they work with states and producers to help develop their site-specific biosecurity plans. And at this time, Dr. Machado has 11 states on board. An additional 5 states have received a presentation as to how RAB app works. But they haven't decided yet if they are going to utilize it in their state. And then also at this point, 22 companies are also on board. Here's some information if you'd like to learn more about the RAB app. Under number 1 is a link that you can learn more about the app itself. Number 2 there, you'll see a contact information there to if you want to reach out and contact the RAB app team with any questions that you might have. Some of the states which are currently utilizing the app at this time include North Carolina, Oklahoma, Texas, Pennsylvania, and Missouri. In conclusion, I just want to say that it doesn't matter if you have 5 pigs on your site or 6,000 sows. We will all be affected by an ASF outbreak, and that there are steps that we can all take on our farms to help prevent ASF from entering. For an ASF outbreak to occur, the virus has to make it into the US, onto a farm, and infect the animals. So we need biosecurity at each level to help keep it out of our country, to keep it from entering the farm, and to keep it from entering our animal enclosures. Thank you again for allowing me to join you today.
Thanks, Dr. Zabel, and for sharing these great resources to help producers get started or build on what they already have in place. We have collected a number of questions over the course of the webinar, and we do have just 30 minutes still for questions. So I'm hoping we can get through a fair number of them here in the remaining time that we have, and hope most of our participants are able to stay with us. I'm going to move back and forth between the Q&A and the chat since we've got questions in both places. I do also want to mention that we have had several inquiries from people about how to access the webinar recordings and register for the upcoming webinars. There is a link at the top of the chat, but if you don't have the chance to get back up to that, you can always just Google ASF Action Week, and it's the first item that comes up. Click on that, and that'll take you to our webinar resource information. So first question. Dr. Scheer, I'm going to pass this one to you, but others can weigh in if needed. Does the process of curing ham inactivate the virus?
I'm not an expert on food processing, but I know that if it's fully cured and to the interior of the problem is to the interior of the ham itself, that would generally kill the virus. But I'm not a food expert, and that's the problem with. There are cured products that are claimed to be cured from other countries, but aren't fully cured, and that's the risk issue that we deal with. And some people like the product when it's not fully cured. So, especially in European countries, we see that a lot. That that's a product that they like to consume. So I would say in the United States, a fully cured ham is probably virus-free.
Appreciate you, though, explaining that there are different definitions of cured out there, and that's why we are careful with our requirements. Next question. It is our understanding from from yesterday's webinar that some states do not follow the suggested federal recommendation of not feeding food waste to pigs. Do we have a, I guess, a counting of what states are still feeding food waste? And is this something that we're going to prevent? Dr. Scheer, do you want to start with that one? I know you may not know every state, but to provide some general context.
I don't know every state. I think there was a report that we either have, I think about 28 states that still feed what we call food waste. They're not allowed to feed by the Swine Health Protection Act. They're not allowed to feed meat to pigs, pork or pork products or anything along those lines, but food waste is allowed, and that's only food waste that is acquired within the United States, not any garbage that comes into the United States from vessels or airline flights is taken under seal and incinerated by the Customs and Border Protection people. So that's how it's handled, but we do have many states that still allow it. I know there's a lot of people that would like to push for eliminating it, and that's a question of biosecurity in and of itself that people have to address. And we monitor these farms. We monitor the cooking of the food waste to a certain temperature. I think it has to reach 212 degrees before it can be fed. And we also monitor these farms for sick or pigs that are showing signs of disease. Those pigs are tested, and those tests go into the laboratory. So a lot of these farms, the garbage feeders, are under a monitoring program by USDA or the state. I don't know if Oriana wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, I can just add that we do regular surveillance for diseases on those operations that are feeding waste that don't have to be cooked, as Dr. Scheer mentioned. So they are a regular part of our surveillance monitoring that goes on across the country, watching for disease incursions.
Thanks, Dr. Beamer. Next question, Dr. Johnson, I think this one is for you. What is the best disinfectant to use for boots, tires, etc., available in the United States?
So there are no labeled claims for ASF specifically in the United States that I'm aware of, but I do believe that out of Great Britain, if I remember right, commercial products, Virkon and Intervention would be two brand names of specific products that have shown the ability to reduce, I think, up to 5 logs of virus, if I remember right. So those would certainly be go-tos from my perspective if ASF was the primary target. But I would also highlight that ASF is not a uniquely difficult pathogen to kill. So whatever your disinfection program is today, if you're using a chemical disinfectant at the appropriate rate, dose, and in the absence of organic material, probably all of them are going to be reasonably effective.
Thanks, Dr. Johnson. Dr. Scheer, I think this next one is for you. Has there been an increase in surveillance testing at the farms and in feral pigs since ASF was found in the Dominican Republic? Has there been any surveillance testing at packing plants?
So on the farms and the feral pigs, we have a feral pig program that is run by Wildlife Services, and they're in states where they're trying to eradicate the pigs. Those pigs are tested. And we also are, whenever there's a call in of a feral hog that's found sick or dying, we'll go out and sample that animal too. And we've increased our surveillance nationally in the feral hog program. We've also increased our surveillance, and this was even before, it was during when China started to have problems. We decided to, any sick pig that was submitted for any reason to a laboratory, known laboratory, we would sample them for CSF and ASF. We used to just do CSF, but we added ASF at the beginning of 2019. So that surveillance program is ongoing. As far as slaughter surveillance, we work jointly with FSIS. If they see a sick hog that's exhibiting signs, they would call us for a foreign animal disease investigation. We do several of those a year. I will say this, though, we need more of those foreign animal disease investigations on farm. The PIGS exhibit we do not have, I would say, is an adequate call-in or a number of those tests and sampling going on. So when science, and of course, ASF resembles a lot of pig diseases. They look similar. Salmonellosis, TGE, you can just go on PRRS. So those diseases that do exist domestically in the United States can mimic African swine fever. And if you're unsure, of course, I think the presentations have said, get a hold of your veterinarian, have your veterinarian get a hold of the state or federal office, and they will send out a foreign animal disease diagnostician to get the samples and get that testing done. It's very important. It's better to be safe than sorry. If you suspect it, call it in. So that's our surveillance program. And I'll ask Oriana if she wants to add anything, because this is kind of her ballpark.
Yeah, I think you did a really good job covering it, Dr. Scheer. I'll put a link in the chat for everyone to look at the existing surveillance plan. It doesn't reflect the latest updates since the detection in the Dominican Republic. We're working on those still, but it'll give you an idea of the different parts and pieces included in our surveillance plan currently.
Thanks for adding that. Next question is for Dr. Johnson. How did the farm in China solve its biosecurity risk of delivering bags of feed?
Yeah, this is a classic situation where we had the tools available to do something better already at the farm level, but we didn't communicate and set expectations with other stakeholders very well. They had bulk bins at the same place in my presentation where I showed you the bagged feed was unloaded. When the farm was built, they put bulk receiving bins to receive complete feed, bulk feed. And so the plan was always to have that bulk feed delivered to the farm from the feed mill and augured directly into those bins where it would live until the farm truck came on the other side of the wall and augured it into the farm truck and then delivered it directly to the production lines from there. The farm had all the infrastructure it needed. The feed mill never bought the feed truck to deliver the feed in bulk. So in China and much of Southeast Asia, it's very common to use bagged feed. The feed mill did not have the truck that they could actually deliver the feed with. And so all it took was us pushing on the feed mill, setting those expectations, really creating accountability. They bought the feed truck and we fixed the problem instantly. It didn't cost the farm anything to fix that problem. It took communication and accountability on the part of one of our business partners.
Thanks for that answer. Dr. Scheer, Dr. Beamer, I think this next question is for you. If testing only catches positive animals a couple of days before they show signs, does that mean that we can have animals coming into the US with the virus?
Well, I'll start and then Ariana, you can finish. Currently, we have restrictions on any country that has ASF or has diagnosed ASF or CSF. So the chances of us importing a live animal with that virus or from countries that are infected are pretty slim. If we're talking about a country that is not known to be infected and they ship animals to us, we would also, on the certificate, it states basically that they're from a country that doesn't have ASF or CSF. That's part of our requirement. You want to take it further on?
Yeah, I'll just add that we do have quarantine periods for some animals, some live animals coming into the country as well, when they would also undergo testing for numerous diseases, including ASF, even if they're coming in from some of those countries. Depends on the country they're coming from, but there's a lot of great information on the website for live animal imports. If you want a few more details about where there are currently animals coming in from and what the requirements are for those animals.
Thanks. Another question, Dr. Scheer, I'm going to start with you and then see if Dr. Beamer wants to weigh in. Are we putting in place a mechanism to test live animals and or of entry?
I didn't get the last part, how you broke up.
Are we putting in place a mechanism to test live animals and/or animal products at ports of entry?
Well, as Dr. Beamer said, if we're importing an animal, we're putting them into quarantine and testing them. But as far as products, again, we don't accept products from ASF infected countries unless we have a negotiated bilateral agreement. And in those bilateral agreements, we negotiate where that pork product can come from and where it can't come from. Poland's a good example. They haven't had it in their domestic swine, but some of their slaughter plants are located where there are feral swine or wild boar that are infected. We won't accept them, and they cannot send product from those areas. We don't, if they're talking about stuff that we remove from planes and ships as far as meat products, we don't test those. We simply incinerate them and get rid of them. So that's currently our program. Oriana, do you want to add anything to that?
I think you got the big ones. Just that there's some international standards put together by the OIE that kind of designate some of those different things for products coming in. But I think you hit all of the high points, Dr. Scheer.
Thanks.
Okay, next question. What kinds of specific challenges regarding biosecurity and compliance are you facing in Hispaniola? Are farmers responding favorably to the control eradication effort? Dr. Scheer?
Well, in the Dominican Republic, their process is that they're going in. We've tested and designated 15 provinces as having infection out of 30, about 32 in the Dominican Republic. What they've done with that testing information is they've gone in and they've found those farms. They've depopulated the pigs on those farms. Now, most of the farms are backyard farms with 3 to 5 pigs. They're small backyard garbage feeding operations. So they've gone in, killed those pigs, and then they've put a 15-kilometer zone, a 3-kilometer zone around that infection and look to see if they could find any other infection within that zone. And any pigs that were exhibiting any type of sickness, they've gone ahead and depopulated. So they've depopulated quite a few of their pigs at this point. They're electrocuting them and and burying them. So most are buried on site. And they are indemnifying the pigs to the tune of about $75 each. There is a problem, I think, with that will occur as time goes on. I don't know if they can move fast enough to find the pigs. People don't believe that the government will pay them for their pigs, so they're hiding their pigs. They're having to use the military and their police force to find and identify infection, which will, in most cases, lead to further spread. So we are continuing to work with them in their laboratory to get testing done and to identify the infected areas and to help them with the elimination of the pigs. But the country, it's not a rich country, so they're going to need financial assistance to carry out the plan. We've listened to anecdotal information that tells us that perhaps the entire island is infected and that the only recourse may be to depopulate all the pigs. We don't know that for sure, but that's what some of the producers are saying on the radio, and we're continuing to monitor it with our testing and we're assisting where we can and where we're asked to assist. It's a difficult situation because diplomatically we can't just go in and do what we want. We have to wait for the request for assistance, and we have to wait for them to ask for and for our level of commitment to be decided in regards to Hispaniola. So that's where things currently sit.
Thanks, Dr. Scheer. This next question is for Dr. Beamer and perhaps Dr. Zabel as well. At this point, for a step before the virus, how can we make a surveillance plan on a farm? I would like to take blood samples, but how many animals do I need to test?
Yeah, Holly, I'll take that one to start with. So currently with our surveillance plan that exists now, you can submit samples to a diagnostic lab, and then if they meet that case definition or the criteria for testing, they'll get included in our surveillance plan. Looking at individual farms and setting up a surveillance plan for each of those, I guess it depends on several factors, what type of farm it is, indoor versus outdoor raised, some of those pieces. I don't know if the question was for a specific type of farm here in the US or not, but there are some online calculators. We have an outbreak surveillance toolbox on the on the USDA website. That has some calculators where you can go in and type in the number of animals that you have and what level of disease you're wanting to try and detect in that farm. And that'll tell you roughly how many animals need to be sampled to look at disease and figure out if you have it or not.
Thanks. Anything to add, Dr. Zabel, from a secure pork perspective?
No, just that I guess just to say that the numbers and the sample types and what the surveillance programs look like come from USDA, but we at Pork Board like to collaborate and provide some research dollars that we're looking at different research projects to help answer some of those questions and to keep enhancing those surveillance programs. So we like those channels of communication to continue and collaborate and do research where it's needed to help answer some of those questions.
Thanks much. Okay, we've had a couple questions about feed. I think this one gets at the bulk of what people have been asking. And Dr. Scheer, I think I'm going to start with you here. Do bag ingredients from countries that have ASF have the opportunity to carry the virus? Should there be a point to hold those bags to allow the virus to dissipate?
Well, there has been research, and I think there's been some good research done by Kansas State University and others that have looked at the survival of ASF or ASF-like viruses on bagged feed, on other constituents, and how long that survival rate is. It's something that I think we can't ignore. And if you're taking all abundance of caution, if you're importing from a country that has ASF, feed or feed ingredients, it's probably a good idea to quarantine that feed. And as Dr. Clayton Johnson said, time and temperature. That's your friend. And if there is virus there, the time and temperature will reduce the log rate or the infectious agent there, and perhaps get it to a point where it's non-infectious. Not saying that it's there, but it is a possibility. We've imported feed from FMD countries and ASF countries for many years and haven't gotten it in our domestic population up to this point. It's not to say that it couldn't happen though, but historically that's been our that's kind of what we lean on. But I would say that if that's a concern, that the industry should find a way to quarantine and keep that feed if they're worried about that infection rate. That's not an area that the APHIS controls. That's in the hands of FDA. So I'm just giving an opinion. I can't say it's not going to happen. I can't say it will, but it hasn't happened up to this point. And we've had that importation from those countries for many years that have both FMD and ASF. Thanks.
Appreciate that context. Dr. Scheer, this next one's for you too. Can USDA make an emergency rule to prohibit garbage feeding in the United States?
It's a good question. I mean, the Swine Health Protection Act kind of governs what garbage feeding what goes on with garbage feeding and what the states need to do to fulfill those rules. There's always an argument between state and federal about who has control and eminent domain. So we would be reluctant, I think, federally to implement a rule that would prohibit garbage feeding. I think in the face of a disease like ASF, should we get that, I think that might change the perspective and it might make things different. But right now, I would say that state by state, they would need to decide. Some states have eliminated it. Some states allow it with certain restrictions above and beyond the Swine Health Protection Act, and some states simply follow the Swine Health Protection Act, which is a good act, and it should ensure that garbage feeding or plate waste, as we call it, is safe and is cooked, and that the pigs are monitored, and if all those things are followed, and we've been doing this for many years, it should be a safe process. But there are always those chances of violation, of course. I don't know if that's a good answer to the question. All I can say is that that's a tough question.
I think you provided good perspective there. So thanks for taking that one on. The next question is for Dr. Johnson and Dr. Zabel. The questioner writes, great biosecurity information in both presentations. The information seems mostly geared toward large operations. Are there differences for small operations?
I'll go first, and I would say no. The goals, the principles, they're all the same. And I would tell you, in my experience, there is no consistent theme between having good biosecurity on a larger operation or smaller operation compared to their different size counterparts. It's all about the investment in time and planning and monitoring. But the goals and the objectives, the practices, they're the same. And when I'm working for a farm with a farm to build biosecurity plans, the size of the farm, we generally don't consider it.
Thanks. Dr. Zabel, anything to add?
I agree, and the resources that we have available aren't size specific to the farm. In fact, the map that was shown there on the right side was a niche farm that was writing a biosecurity plan, and that's how they do the lines and removing some of the biosecurity measures around their site. So it can be adjusted to any size of operation.
Thanks, Dr. Zabel. Dr. Johnson, you may want to take this next question as well. What are the vector risks for pests such as cats, birds, and rodents?
Well, I think that we know that those animals transmit domestic diseases already. Some that are extremely serious foodborne illness concerns. So for that reason alone, we want to exclude those animals from the farm. I have tried to get rodents and birds to take showers and disinfect themselves before coming in, and they don't listen very well. They don't follow the SOP. In all seriousness, right? That's a great example of one where we can't use hygiene and sanitation. And if we can't use hygiene and sanitation, and we know there's evidence that animal can be a vector or a fomite, either one, we have to exclude those animals for the domestic disease risks and the food safety risks alone.
Thanks, Dr. Johnson. Dr. Scheer, I think this next one is best answered by you. Why don't we restrict the movement of live hogs to one state away so we don't have pigs moving from Florida or Texas to Iowa, Minnesota, or Illinois?
Well, the way the industry is currently set up, there are 1 million hogs on the road every day going somewhere. Okay, 1 million. And that's just an estimate I think that estimate came from 2020. So the hog industry is while being fully integrated, is vast. And pigs that are born in North Carolina often are put on trucks and are being shipped to Iowa to be raised to the weight before they go to processing. So that industry is vast. There are big companies that are fully integrated that have farms in different states, and to restrict that movement to one or two states, while optimal for disease control would be a nice thing, it's just not economically the way the industry is set up. So, and we cannot, as a federal agency or a state, intervene in that production model.
Thanks, Dr. Scheer. This next question is probably for you too. Actually you and Dr. Johnson, in your view, is China going to cure its ASF problem with biosecurity measures?
I'm going to let Dr. Johnson go first because I have my opinion. I'd like to hear his.
They have many of the same challenges that we're going to have here in the United States. It is an integrated industry, but it's one where the biggest integrators maybe control 5 to 10% of the market share. So you have to get buy-in from so many people on what the plan is, and it requires so many resources that it's very difficult to effectively execute. I think if you look at the endemic status of their herd right now, it's going to be very difficult to imagine that biosecurity alone will solve this problem in the near future. I think if they do solve it and eliminate it through biosecurity, you're talking, 3 to 5 years down the road, best case scenario. But I don't have any evidence that that's in the near future, or that even the preliminary steps you'd have to take have been accomplished to be on that pathway, unfortunately. That'd be my perspective.
I agree. I think if we look at China, that what they've done is they've tried to rebuild, and they brought in, they thought they eliminated the disease. They brought in clean hogs. They built huge facilities to house those hogs, but they didn't really address their biosecurity completely, and they had a vaccine issue with the vaccine that they created. I would agree with Dr. Johnson. I think if we could get a vaccine into China that worked and start to protect the hogs that don't have ASF, they can make tremendous progress. But currently, there's no vaccine on the market or that has been developed. There are some that are close, and that's going to be an important factor in the future. And I think if China could get a hold of a vaccine that's been developed and that is effective and doesn't allow the recurrence of the disease, then I think they can make progress. But we've heard from folks that are in the country and that are working with the different companies, and they will say that the cross-contamination is a severe factor there. So that while they have biosecurity plans, they aren't often observed, and that's a problem. So it'll take them some time. I agree with Dr. Johnson.
I'd add one more thing here, if I could take just a few more seconds. We have the greatest collection of animal health resources in the world in the United States. We have the best researchers. We have the best pharmaceutical companies, bios manufacturers, right? The rest of the world is looking to us to solve this problem. We can choose to solve it before it gets here, and we have to fight it within our own borders. Or we can work aggressively to try and solve it when the battlefront is in somebody else's country. That would be my perspective of it.
I think that is a perfect message as we get ready to close out today's webinar. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Before I turn things over to Dr. Scheer for final words, I would just like to mention that tomorrow we are going to be talking during our webinar at 2 p.m. Eastern again on what producers can expect in the event of an outbreak here in the United States. Of course, we want to prevent that, but we want to make sure producers know what to expect should it occur. And then Friday will be focused on feral swine. So if we didn't get to your question today, there's still 2 more days, and we look forward to having you back. Dr. Scheer, over to you.
Thank you, Hallie. I'd just like to thank our speakers. Great presentations. In closing, I'd like to say, along with Dr. Johnson, I think he's right on target, and I think the United States has a challenge in front of us. We have what's going on in the DR right now, and that's our challenge. What are we going to do? What's going to be our response? What can we learn if we do respond, and where can we take that to help other countries? So while we don't want to turn, and this is always an issue, you don't want to turn an outbreak into a research project. You want to get rid of the disease, but at the same time you want to learn and implement whatever tools you can and test those tools in the face of that outbreak. And that's how we learn and grow. And and I agree, that's where we're going to go. That's where we're going to grow forward and be able to battle this disease. If you watch the progression of this disease, it's moved across a great part of Asia, a great part of Europe, and of course it's always been endemic in Africa. So we have a challenge in front of us, and that's not going away. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Scheer. Again, we appreciate everyone joining today and hope to have you back with us tomorrow. Take care.
Recording stopped.
Mis crías